Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Wednesday, January 23rd, 2019. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America. Downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Associate Professor Tressie McMillan Cottom, author of Lower Ed, The Troubling Rise of For-Profit Colleges in the New Economy, and her latest, Thick, and other essays. Also on the program today, 2 votes in the Senate. Hopefully we'll start the road to opening the government, but don't count on it. Meanwhile, food pantries for the Coast Guard, IRS walkaways, domestic violence shelters understaffed, and more. Meanwhile, the LA teacher strike ends. Denver tees up theirs. And protests turned violent in Venezuela. Is U.S. fomenting a coup? Trump is at an all-time low now, and Medicare for All is at an all-time high.
Good polls.
Meanwhile, Maine governor rejects former Maine Governor Lepage's Medicaid work requirements. And finally, it makes sense. Rudy is drunk.
I knew there was something beyond just him being a terrible person.
What?
There had to be something else.
New York State Reproductive Health Act passes, signed, and protects a woman's right to choose no matter what those a-holes on the Supreme Court do. One state down, 49 to go. Joe Biden made some paid speeches to support a GOP candidate. That will not be taken well by people in the Democratic primary. And a new study. Corporations use charitable donations to help themselves deregulate.
What?
You don't say.
All this and more.
It's called synergy.
On today's program.
Because I'm smart.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's right. It's because, we have talked about that a little bit in the past. There have been various, I just remember a very explicit example sticks out in my mind. The NAACP, I think, came out and was fighting against the soda regulations in New York City. And there was an argument, I guess, that perhaps you have food deserts, and it was you have a food desert, so it's tough to find non-sugary drinks in bodegas, and but it was always rather strained. And now there's been a researcher who has sat down and taken and done a massive study that to find the correlations between nonprofits, which sort of oddly weigh in on regulatory questions that they have seemingly no reason to, and the massive contributions they get from those corporations.
There's a consulting firm called Dewey Square Group, and they're used to be really big. I mean, I think they're still in the mix, but they used to have like all of their principals worked for the main Democratic candidates in like '04 and '08. Michael Wally, I think, is the guy who founded the group, and he's like a field guy from Boston. But one of the techniques that they pioneered was getting people who had like community leadership reputations to lobby officials essentially like in an AstroTurf capacity. So it would be like a second order, like, I'm from the community of concerned whatever, and I want to talk to you about the soda ban, but really they're working an indirect contract for the beverage manufacturers.
Right.
And so that was like the corollary of that, where they had a goal almost of like, you know, frontward, the NAACP endorses something that doesn't make any sense. And then on the back end, you might be being lobbied, but not even necessarily realize it as a public official.
Right.
That's so bad.
Yeah. But it was very upsetting for some of the more philanthropic to find out that that's why they spend their money. But we will talk more about that.
Shout out Anand Giadardis.
Yes. We will talk more about that as we get later in the program. However, you know, we've mentioned, I've top-lined. Look, there's tons of stories out there. I'm sure many of you have seen them. They're individual stories of federal workers who are, you know, deciding, choosing between insulin money and electricity or food for their kids. You have IRS employees who are skipping work because of hardship, and they need to either go work part-time somewhere else, or they can't get to work. Coast Guard Commandant said that members of the armed forces should not be expected to shoulder the burden of a partial governmental shutdown. There is Coast Guard folks having to go to food pantries. I mean, we're seeing this across the board, and never mind, like, you know, I don't know how you measure the anxiety that's created by this, and the ripple effects. The Sarah story the other day talking about how the damage that's being done in some of the more sensitive areas of our federal parks. It will take decades for it to recover, because some of these, there's a reason why they tell you, you know, only walk on the paths. But the Trump administration and family, they care, ladies and gentlemen. Here is Lara Trump. She is Eric Trump's wife, on sitting down with Carrie Sheffield, who, of course, is the founder of Bold TV, and on Bold, talking about that very, very issue.
So in terms of the workers who are coming to work and not getting paid, what would you say to them?
Listen, it's not fair to you, and we all get that, but this is so much bigger than any one person. It is a little bit of pain, but it's going to be for the future of our country, and their children and their grandchildren and generations after them will thank them for their sacrifice right now. I know it's hard. I know people have families, they have bills to pay, they have mortgages, they have rents that are due.
I've read about it.
The president is trying every single day to come up with a good solution here. And the reality is, it's been something that's gone on for too long and been unaddressed, our immigration problem. If we do nothing right now, it's never going to get fixed. This is our one opportunity. So I would just tell them, please stay strong. We appreciate everything that you're sacrificing. We are behind you, and we're going to do everything we can. I know the president is doing everything he can to resolve this quickly.
Yeah.
That's bold.
She just nodded. Yes, that was good for her.
It's just important that everybody remembers that this is not about one person.
That's right.
That's the most important takeaway, is that this has nothing to do with an individual highly disturbed person's individual needs and whims.
I honestly
could not be further from what's happening.
I mean, look, you've got 800,000 people, right? And then plus you have, I don't know how many tens of thousands of contractors, maybe more, that have been impacted by this. That would probably be impacted even more severely in some respects, because they may never get repaid for this, for the loss of work. And I'm trying to figure out some type of algorithm of how many of those people actually would, if they were sitting as the third person in that group right there with the founder of Bold TV and Eric Trump's wife, if they would nod their head in agreement, yes, I understand. It's bigger than me, and it's really about the future. My grandkids are probably going to thank me so much because there might be 1/60th funding for a wall that will never get built if this ever gets resolved.
They're using this. She's using the sense of urgency that should be used right at this moment for climate change to talk about demographics.
Oh yeah, to help
Right.
the Chinese. Yeah, way to give up the store, Matt. Totally sad, totally unfair. We do. I mean, I know Barbara Ehrenreich is now on this, and obviously, it's been in the air for a while. But I mean, we got to look at some type of general strike action. It's insane.
Yeah, well, there's been a lot of people actually who've been calling for that, particularly for the TSA. And
but just across the board,
and they
this thing is just totally unacceptable.
They can't replace them with scabs because there's no money. So who's going to work for no money?
That's right. And it's also
checks in the mail.
Theoretically, you're right. You need a little bit of training, right? Like the whole theater of.
I was going to say that part I don't know about.
Right.
I think anybody
I don't know.
TSA training would be like, hey, you want to be really annoying?
I flew
Tell
this
people
weekend,
to take
and
their belts off.
What about the air traffic controllers, huh?
Exactly.
Oh,
yes,
definitely that.
I can do that.
Yeah,
scab it for.
I flew this.
Hey, look at Matt.
I flew this weekend, and I made a point of saying to the TSA folks I saw, "Thanks for being here." If I was you, I'd just walk out. And there was a little bit of they're not going to talk that way, but there was a little bit of a little head nodding a little bit. Well, thank you.
Next time I fly, if this is still happening, I'll thank them and say, where's the future?
Right.
Guys, commandeer the sound system at least, guys. Put on some good
they
music.
did that in some airports.
I'm pretty excited about this ad read because this is a company I've been pining for some of their furniture. In fact, I have designed. I mean, look, a little bit of a hack, but people know I do a little bit of woodworking. And I have designed some pieces of furniture based upon this stuff. There's a lot of mid-century modern type of furniture you can find here. I don't know if you've heard about Joybird. It is the company behind the revolution in online furniture shopping. Joybird offers one-of-a-kind furniture made to your unique taste. You can turn your ideas into reality with hundreds of styles and options. From mid-century modern to contemporary classics, all customizable in an amazing array of fabric choices from rich, buttery leather, plush velvets, to every color imaginable. There's even a wide range of kid and pet-friendly upholstery available. You can also use their free personal design consultants to nail down your perfect design. And with Joybird's 365-day home trial, you can skip the furniture store and bring the showroom home. Sit on it, sleep on it, break it in, and if you don't love your Joybird, return for a full refund. In-home delivery is hassle-free. They'll even remove all the packing materials. And returns are free within 2 weeks of delivery. See how Joybird is revolutionizing online furniture shopping. Create the furniture that brings you joy today at joybird.com/majority. Go to joybird.com/majority and receive an exclusive offer, 25% off your first order by using the code majority. Head over there and just check out. I mean, you check out the couches, obviously, and all the other, and they've got some pretty fun of those spinning seats, but like the mid-century modern media centers, those are the ones that I love. The sliding.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, they're pretty cool. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, professor of sociology at Virginia Commonwealth University, author of Thick and Lower Ed, Tressie McMillan Cottom, when we come back. We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report on the phone. It's a pleasure to welcome to the program Assistant Professor of Sociology at Virginia Commonwealth University, Faculty Associate at the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society, author of 2 books, Thick and Other Essays, and Lower Ed, The Troubling Rise of For-Profit Colleges in the New Economy. Tressie McMillan Cottom, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me, Sam.
So the for-profit college stuff fascinates me, and the way in which you came about to write of the for-profit college university world is also pretty fascinating. Just let folks know, how you decided to focus on that.
Well, the story is probably less about how I decided to focus on it and why it was possible for me to be doing this project. And I probably started this in like 2010, that I seemed to be the only one who kind of wanted to do this project. And I think that is about my personal experience of the for-profit college sector. But I also think that speaks to the fact that there are so few people like me who had ever touched that sector of higher education who were also in that traditional academic world. And so what happened was I was in graduate school, and listen, Sam, I was going to do anything but this project. I wanted to actually study Ronald Reagan, if you can believe that, and instead end up doing this project because as I was working on my doctoral work, for-profit colleges were experiencing this phenomenal boom of enrollment. They were taking in billions of dollars every year from the federal student aid system. And when you start talking about numbers in the billions, people tend to start paying attention. And there was a lot of media scrutiny. There was some growing political scrutiny of the for-profit college sector. But to my mind, there had not been sort of a critical engagement with not just why for-profit colleges were so profitable or so popular, but about who they were enrolling. And I knew a little bit about who they were enrolling and why that mattered because I had, before I had gone to graduate school, I had worked in the for-profit college sector myself as an enrollment officer. And so my experience of it was shaped very much by understanding that not everybody was vulnerable to the for-profit college machine, and also that it was a machine and that we probably needed to better understand why millions of people all woke up at one time and decided that they wanted to pursue a college credential at all costs. And when you went to the for-profit college sector, at all costs was the key term. And it was almost, literally at one time. In 2000, you had about 400,000 people enrolled in these for-profit colleges. By now, it's over 2 million, is my understanding. So let's just give us a sense of what we're talking about, because you have 2 different types, broadly speaking, that you discuss right. And you generalize it by calling the beauty school and the technical, I guess it is. Wait, I had it right here. Right. And so tell us what this is and how their funding mechanism works. Right. I use these as 2 archetypes, and I had experience in actually what I call both of the subsectors of for-profit colleges. So one of the things that I think kind of got lost in our lumping all of the institutions together was a misunderstanding that 2 different sort of phenomena were happening. So on the one hand, you had what had been the sort of historical role of for-profit colleges, which was they mostly provided career, technical certification and training, right? And so that was the certificates that you need that were just probably below a college degree, maybe even below a 2-year degree, but that you needed to become certified in an occupation. So that is a mechanics training, cosmetology school. Those had grown out a little bit into things like what we once used to call maybe secretarial programs, and now tend to think of broadly as administrative or business assistant programs. And then this growth into the healthcare sector. And so things like a certified nursing assistant. That's all of these sort of short-term credentials, usually take you less than 2 years to complete them, but that are necessary requirements for work. I group those under the beauty college paradigm in my book. And those are a little different, and the incentives that people have for attending those schools are a little different than those that are happening in what I call the technical college system, which is the sector that I think most of us were more familiar with in the mid first decade of the 2000s, because these were the ones that had all the television commercials, right? Strayer University, the University of Phoenix, Capella, and all of those. So these were programs that were starting an overreach that was historically new. They had started reaching into the 4-year degrees and beyond. They are offering graduate degrees in things like clinical psychology, and nursing and healthcare. They were offering bachelor's, master's, doctorate degrees, and the incentives for people to pursue those degrees were related to the other part, but they were not exactly the same. And the real growth in the sector, while a lot of it did happen in that beauty college sector, the real growth and the real money, the investment from the private sector, the investment from shareholders and private equity firms, the financial sector was really interested in the growth of that 4-year degree and beyond, the technical college sector, as I call it in the book.
So on one hand, we have sort of what one could consider a sort of almost a vocational school. On some level. And the other is this sort of new animal that, and we're talking about Fortune 500 companies here. We're talking, right? I mean, we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars per, in terms of revenue per, year on these companies. And that's really where, on some level, like the action is, right? I mean, in that sector. And it's fascinating to me because you really, I mean, I'm quite familiar with sort of some of the dynamics, but you look beyond the dynamics and look at what's going on in society that sort of like bring that about. But before we get to that part, walk people through the business model of a place like one of these technical, what you call technical side schools, because it is, I don't want to say it's a criminal syndicate in my estimation, but it's close.
It is close to being the underside of financialization, which is what I would kind of think of it. It is not unlike what we saw happen in the mortgage crisis. It is not unlike what we are starting to see in the student loan debt crisis, and those things are very much related. And that is that capital looks for something to invest in. And as consumers become stretched and can't do as much consumer buying, right, what becomes profitable are the things that people have to pay for. Now, that's the social part. And so one of the things I'm looking at in the book is, why did all of a sudden everybody need or want a college degree? What was it that was so attractive to the investment class about this 4-year degree and beyond sector that made it so very profitable? That system looks like looking at what is going on in the economic system and the economic structure. Here we talk about the labor market, but also how comfortable or how safe people feel in the economy. What the system is really preying on is how vulnerable people feel in the labor market. Vulnerability became extremely profitable to the for-profit college sector as a solution. It positioned itself as a solution to workers who are feeling economically vulnerable in the labor market. If you thought that your wages were stagnant, which we now know to be empirically true, people's wages have stagnated over the last 25 years. If you thought your consumer purchasing power had declined, well, you weren't crazy. It had declined. But instead of responding to those things with what we maybe would have done, 40 years ago with a sort of social policy response, what we told millions of people was, this is your fault. This is because you're not competitive enough for the new jobs of the 21st century. The only way to prove that you are competitive is to get a degree and to keep pursuing credentials and degrees, and to do that at your own individual cost.
And you call this the education gospel.
That is correct. It is the gospel that says it doesn't matter what the reality of the economic relationship is, because it is predatory, as you point out. It is preying on predatory in the true sense of the word, which is that it's preying upon people's economic vulnerabilities. The education gospel says, don't worry about those details. Don't worry about what the economic relationship is or the details of the contract you're signing. Education will always pay off because it has always paid off. We were so invested in the gospel that education could never fail you that I think on the social policy and certainly on the political front, we fell down on asking tough questions about whether or not this specific type of education actually paid off for people. And what we know now is that the picture is not very good for whom that educational investment has paid off for. For-profit colleges are more expensive than most of your traditional not-for-profit college options. Students tend to bear more of the individual costs through student loans, as opposed to, say, grants and scholarships or employee benefits. They take longer to complete those programs, and as it turns out, the labor market doesn't seem to reward it in higher wages.
All right, so let's talk about we should also say that something like when you talk about the schools that you mentioned, these bigger for-profit universities, which are also predominantly online, right? We're talking about something like 95% of their tuition costs are paid via student loans from the U.S. government, right? And
But legally, it's supposed to be we have this 90-10 rule, right? What for-profit colleges are held to is a standard that only up to 90% of their tuition can come from the federal student aid program, and the other 10% is supposed to come from direct tuition payments from either employers or from students. What this is supposed to do is, how this is described is a check on the school's value to the consumer. But 90%, first of all, is still extremely high, and it's only 90% in theory, because what we have found is that many schools, that doesn't include things like GI Bill money, is usually counted in that 10%. And so some institutions, when you count up all of the government subsidized payments coming to them, approach something far closer to, as you said, to that 95% coming from publicly subsidized dollars.
All right, and so give us a sense of demographically who these students tend to be, their age, their background, because they're a lot of these students are similarly situated, right? They're ambitious, but they also don't necessarily have the social the social cash or the networking to enter into what we traditional higher ed schools or be aware, or they can't afford to because they've got to take care of their children or they have other responsibilities.
Exactly. I think the real telling statistic in the for-profit college sector's demographics is in gender, actually. And in the book, I talk a lot about race, class, and gender, but I really think gender is the biggest piece because it tells, I think, exactly that story, Sam, which is this. About 68, anywhere between 68 and 74%, depending on which year you take it, and this hasn't changed much over the last 10 years, of those enrolled in the for-profit college sector are women, right? This is really a gendered problem that I think really speaks to why people would attend these schools. People are attending them mostly because they, have already been disadvantaged in the paid labor market. We know all of the general statistics and trend lines of how much more credentialed women have to be paid equal salaries in the labor market, how much more difficult it can be for them to have upward mobility into higher income positions. But we also know that bigger story that women tend to be the ones more likely to be caring for children. And when you're talking about the age range of the student, we tend to think of them as quote unquote non-traditional, but that just doesn't always necessarily mean they're older. It usually just means that they are also caring for a child. When you're talking about people in that position, they're also more likely to be caring for parents. This is a very familiar story for many of us, trapped between caring for children and caring for aging parents. And their economic position then needs to not only take care of themselves, but they are really trying to take care of a whole family, right? And so when they are having problems moving up or getting secure employment in the labor market, they are especially vulnerable to a message that sounds like this. Call today, start school tomorrow, get a degree fast, get a better paying job almost immediately, because that's the message, right? Call today, start tomorrow, change your life. Well, that's the message that would be more attractive to people for whom changing their life means changing the lives for their children, for their elderly parents, et cetera. And that's women. And then when we move from there, of those enrolled in the for-profit college sector, they are more likely to be African American, Hispanic, low-income students. That's not to say that men don't attend, and they certainly do. It's not to say that white students don't attend. But when we're looking at like the typical face, the next time your listeners are maybe looking at those commercials, it's a really good indicator when you look at who they put in the commercials. Right? They're overwhelmingly women who are talking about they're going to do their homework while their kids are asleep. That's because that tells you who they know their ideal typical student is. And those people are particularly vulnerable to that message and are especially vulnerable to taking on student loan debt to pay for that kind of chance.
And we should say that when my understanding of it is, and walk me through this, but there's a quality that reminded me in the way that they get paid. That reminded me of working in commercial radio. The key to commercial radio was always you want to hold people over the first, the next quarter hour. If you could get them past that, and there's a dynamic in these schools that is like this based upon the schedule in which student loans are dished out. Is that right?
That is correct. So the goal of the enrollment machine that I talk about describe in the book is to get students enrolled as quickly as possible. The idea being that the more time and the more opportunity students have to reflect on their decision, the more likely you are to lose them. Right. So you wanted to get them when they called, you want them to come in immediately to sign their paperwork and to get their federal financial student aid application completed as quickly as possible. And I mean, we're talking in many cases within a week, which sounds very odd to those of us who went through like the traditional college system. So that's why I want to put some numbers on this. We're not talking weeks or months. We're talking you call on a Tuesday, you visit on a Wednesday, you're enrolled when you leave Wednesday, and your financial aid paperwork is done by that Friday. Then the next goal there is to get them started in a class as quickly as possible. Depending on when you make that phone call, what we call rolling enrollment dates are going on, meaning there's almost always a new class starting. You're rarely waiting more than 2 weeks to start in the next class. And that was important because the federal student aid system will not pay the tuition until they have what we call butt in seat, right? The student's butt needs to be in the seat. They've got to show up on that first day of class, and the attendance during that first 3 weeks or that first month of school is critically important because that's how the student is then counted for student aid purposes before the check is sent. Right. And then the money, the lion's share of that tuition enrollment comes up front. There's certainly other dollars that come as the student continues on in school, but the student is quite valuable there at the earliest part of that process for that reason.
And then the retention becomes an important metric for these schools, right? Because they want that second check.
Right. Not even so much completion because there's no bonus for like getting the students completed. There can be a penalty for them not completing, but it is about making sure they are there through the deadline, the cutoff deadlines for the student aid payment.
And so when you were working in admissions, like what kind of data did they provide you with in terms of return on investment? That's what sort of fascinates me because I feel like if these schools, my understanding is they take a tremendous amount of data about their students as a way of sort of like, how do we market to them? How do we keep them in the seats? How do we get them in the seats? How do we keep? And we're being metaphorical with the seats, right? Because they could theoretically be doing it online.
Right.
But what you never see is 75% of our students end up making 30% more 2 years out after graduation or some figure like that, which would be, that's the key metric, isn't it?
It is. And now this is where I kind of want to be fair. We don't actually have a good metric on that for any of higher education. The problem is it's probably less of a problem if you went to a traditional not-for-profit college, right? So we haven't had to be as dogged about that kind of data. That's actually, I think, one of the weaknesses in our data system that for-profit colleges have exploited. The fact that we have not had great data on employment returns for all students has made it pretty easy for the for-profit college sector to say, well, hey, it's not like we're falling down the job. Nobody has this data. They're right. They're just not don't have the right motivation when they say that. We do not have excellent data on how much a student earns after they graduate. Some of that is the federal system's fault. some of that is the for-profit college sector's fault. What I will say is I talk to people who manage the marketing data at for-profit colleges, and they have better data than what is often publicly available to us about how these students are doing. It is that they are not compelled to release it, and they do not release it and use it in their marketing materials to the students. What was more common was for us to slide this disclosure agreement across to the students that the U.S. Department of Education has required for-profit colleges to do. They have to usually provide things like disclaimers about your student loan debt. They have to provide disclaimers about the graduation rates and their job placement data. But that usually looks something like this. It was usually about how much people in this type of job would earn. What they didn't usually break it out to say was, this is how much people in this job who got their degree from us have earned. So, for example, you would say, hey, I want to get a certificate in, electrical engineering, and we'd say, all right, we offer that degree program. Here's what people with an electrical engineering certificate earned last year, according to the Occupational Outlook Handbook. That's what we would tell them. But we did not separate out and break out, but this is how much students who earned their degree with us are making in said jobs. And that's a level of finesse that very few people have to push back against a college to ask for that level of detail. And
you say that you're convinced that these institutions, as it were, have data on what the return on investment is, at least to some extent. And I mean, I think it's fairly obvious that if it was gangbusters, we'd know about it. Right?
Yeah, that's what I've always said to them. If it's great, awesome, right? You should definitely lead with that information. I've certainly said the same thing.
Right.
And there are some smaller programs in some for-profit colleges that do extremely well, often because they are attached to other type of arrangements, right? They have a direct line, for example, they're training people to work at AT&T, and AT&T has agreed to hire X amount of people. But those are anomalies for the most part. Most of the students who are going through these sort of generalized degree programs are relying on employers to decide whether or not their degree means something. And because of that, they're usually competing with people who have degrees from other places, and their wages often do not look comparable. And I suspect that if most for-profit colleges had data that says that they were doing that significantly better than average, they would certainly advertise it.
I would imagine even if they're doing average, they would advertise it, is my guess. But I mean, I'm not a marketing guy, so I don't know. But and we should say, I mean, just to be fair, I've heard of some programs where you come in and they will your fee, you don't even pay until you make back a certain percentage of your income. I mean, there are programs that are set up better, and I think some of these, I think folks associated with it are striving to, in certain instances. I mean, give me a sense of what the people working there, how much was your awareness as you were sitting there saying, this seems a little weird that we're not talking about a return on investment, which is why everybody walking through the door is here, right? At a not-for-profit school, some schools, some liberal arts schools, people are there for citizen, I want to be a better citizen, or, I don't have to worry about my finances or whatever it is. But clearly, most of the people walking through that door are like, I'm here because in 2 years, I want to be making 30% more than I'm making today.
Right.
And
that is absolutely fair. I mean, the for-profit colleges themselves say of their marketing data that the number one reason that their prospective students and enrolled students tell them that they enrolled in school or sought out school with them, it was to earn more money immediately, right? So that, the students tend to be making a very sort of rational economic exchange when they attend a for-profit college in a way that is less true in traditional, especially on-campus four-year degree programs, that we have this sort of broader, like you said, liberal arts mission, and where the value of college can then be a bit more subjective. I remember feeling that, I had gone to traditional colleges myself, as did a few of my colleagues there in the enrollment office. So we knew it was different than our own experience. And I remember being troubled by it, and I talk a little about that in the book, but having absolutely no words for describing why I was uncomfortable, right? So these words about things like, social inequality and, who can make take on the opportunity cost of sitting out the labor market to go back to school. None of us had that language. I will say some of us were less concerned with it than others, but I do like to point out, I think everybody there, save for a few sort of extreme cases, fundamentally thought that the education gospel worked. And so if we were offering an opportunity for people to better themselves, if it was costing them a lot of money, that was still better than nothing. Where it did get stickier is that there were admissions people who would say things like, I myself would not go to college this way, right? I wouldn't go to school here, or I wouldn't allow my children to go to school here. But this is still a good option for quote unquote other people. And that's where I thought when people felt uncomfortable or were wrestling with those ideas, that's where it usually manifested.
Okay, and this is, that's fascinating because I think there is this sort of quality of like, I don't know, both an ignorance to the sort of the reality of what's being offered and sort of a predisposition to presume there's nothing else that can be done for these folks.
Right.
And that is let's talk a little bit about that part, because the Obama administration started to crack down on some of this by basically saying, you're not eligible for student loans, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but you're not eligible for student loans unless you use specific accrediting companies or certain accrediting values, and they said to, I think it was Corinthian and ITT, like your accreditor, that's not real. We don't buy it. And then their loans dried up and their business dried up overnight and they had to close. But that was insufficient because why?
Well, it doesn't solve the big problem, right? So, we can think of this in our own lives. The grocery store closing down, the grocery store you really like closest to your home closes down. It doesn't solve the problem that you need groceries, right? The real root of the problem was the demand, not the supply. And I would point out about these schools that did rely significantly on federal student aid dollars. And once they lose their accreditation, you tend to lose then your ability to offer student aid. And that's pretty much the end of usually any for-profit college school, as it would, to be fair, for all schools. But the accreditation piece, the Obama administration was becoming more particular about the data they were requiring the for-profit college to provide to judge whether or not they were meeting the threshold of providing a quality education. Now, the for-profit colleges, I should say, debate to the death whether or not that's a fair assessment of them, whether they should be held to that standard or not, and whether the metric is fair. But that is what the Obama administration was doing. What I will say is that what the Obama administration, and really what no administration has done in quite some time, is really wrestle, however, with that bigger problem. There was this recent report that just came out a couple months ago, I think from the Center for American Progress, that said the job skills myth, the job skills have been a myth, right? Yep. Well, that's all I was writing about, what many of us have been writing about for some time, that what we have been telling people, the social inequality problem in the labor market was not about people not having the right skills. And instead of solving that problem and being honest in our political rhetoric to say this is not about employers not having the right skills. This is about employers not wanting to pay fair wages. This is about us not holding employers to task for their tax responsibility. There was a lot at play. And I will say that nobody had really hit on the political rhetoric that I think solved the problem of demand. And that was why for-profit colleges remain somewhat popular with people. Demand has not dried up because there's still a demand for a good quality of life with good wages. And they're still making that promise.
And we should. I want to be really explicit about this so people understand. So the myth was that there was a mismatch in our workforce with their education, and all the research now shows. A big report came out very recently, and I think it was from the Center for Economic Progress. But I'm not. Regardless, regardless, it basically showed that in fact what was happening is, as it became more of a buyer's market for employers, they just got more narrow in what they would accept. from people rather than certain skill sets being needed. But we're also talking about people who are already employed more often than not, right? When you're going to these schools.
That's right.
These are people who just want to get better wages and be able to care for their families. So we have a not so much of a lack of employment situation, but rather poor pay for people who are doing decent work. And,
that is right.
And so we had this. I mean, on some level, I feel like the educational story in this sector is not terribly different than when we see education in the context of K through 12, insofar as we're looking at schools to deal with societal ills that are really not in their portfolio.
That is correct. And that is really the big story and the tougher story, frankly, right? People don't like the story. When I say people, it's, I think it's hard for politicians. I think it's hard for policy people to get a good story. We're just so deeply invested in the narrative. But the real story here is that it is not just possible, but now I think we can empirically argue that it is true that colleges cannot, and school K through 12 or K through 16 cannot solve these larger social ills. That the real problem of wages was never about the human capital of the workers working in jobs. And so when you told people that story, all you did was make them very valuable to the financial sector, who were able to exploit that fear by selling credentials. But that does not solve the problem that what workers are really facing is a really tough path to not just a good job, but what we would call internal mobility, the promotions over time, for your wages to increase over time. When you work at a job and after 5 years that you should be earning more than when you started. Those kinds of problems are not human capital problems.
And we should say, I mean, it's interesting what's implicated here, because the access to government loans clearly drove up the prices of these places, right? Because they're just they're basically fixing their tuition as a function of that 90-10 rule. Like we're going to make our tuition cost 10% more than whatever is available for people in terms of government loans. And that dynamic, of course, would be fixed and in many respects reversed if we, instead of having a massive loan program, we provided at least one or two free options per state, but that's maybe a separate issue. But I want to...
No, I don't think it's a separate issue. I actually think it's a super important one, Sam. It's one of the ones that I argue for, that the real competition, we thought that the competition that needed to happen in the higher education, quote unquote, market was that you needed more institutions. And that's what we saw happen from 1990s to 2010s, when we created tons of new institutions. But as long as the student aid system is underwriting all of those institutions the same, that's not actually creating more competition. They would just increase the size of the pie and just take in more students. That's what the for-profit college sector really was. Real competition would come through true, accessible, affordable options. And the only people who can do that, the only entity that can do that is the state. And so I actually believe that's the real solution.
Interesting. And so let me ask you this, and just as we broaden this out, because I want to just touch on your, and I will confess to not having read Thick yet, but I will also say it is right on the top of my list of things to read. How
that's acceptable.
All right, I appreciate that. Thank you for that. But I mean, how the issues that you talk about in Thick, I mean, to the extent that I know what it's about, is addressing your experience largely, and also I think the experience of other people who are within our society, who are in folks who are similarly positioned, who may be targeted because they're the most vulnerable, particularly when they feel this pressure economically, or by race, or by gender. Draw the connective tissue between these two books for me.
Yeah, that's a great question, actually, because to me the connective tissue was always there, and I laugh sometimes when I did have to do this with the publisher, going, no, to me this is all part of the same story. When they asked me to sort of position the book, in many ways, my thinking about lower ed started with asking a very basic question, which was, wow, a lot of these for-profit colleges have a lot of Black women enrolled. Why is that? And by starting from there, you got to all of these larger issues, not because there was something unique about Black women, but there was something unique about when a predatory system is built, it almost always starts with the most vulnerable people in a society. That's how predation works. And so if for-profit colleges were a predatory economic arrangement, which I argue that they are, it made sense that it would start by serving parts of the population that were poorly served by other institutions. So that means women and people of color disproportionately. So my questions start there. And one of the larger arguments of the new collection of essays where, I take that through looking at technology, I take it by looking at popular culture and policy and media, is that story is true over and over again. And that what we learn when you pay attention to who is most vulnerable in the system, you understand the system better. One of the reasons why I think I was able to write Lower Ed and it hadn't been written before by someone else is that you do get a clarity about how a system is working when you look at its weakest points, right? So I was able to say, look, there's something here about the relationship between student loan money and economic insecurity and labor market changes. There has to be something here because look at what's happening with this subset of people. And in many ways, all I'm saying across this collection of essays is that reveals a lot of important information about our system, no matter what part of the system that we're looking at.
To what extent do Black women in particular, because you note that they are in many respects the most, or at least one of the groups that is most susceptible to these type of predatory, specifically because they're not being served by other institutions.
Right.
To what extent is there an awareness of that as a systemic problem? And I ask only because I've talked to people who've done ethnographies of people who've lost their homes in foreclosure in the wake of the foreclosure crisis. And there wasn't necessarily a big understanding that their experience was not unique, that it wasn't a function of the decisions that they had made, but rather it was a function of decisions that had been made by people they didn't know. What is your sense of that of the awareness of those folks as being in this predicament because of the system rather as opposed to decisions that they have made?
Yeah, I think that just overall, we have a real paucity of language to talk about systems thinking, right, in our culture. And that, we see this over and over again when we talk about, who are these stupid people who signed up for these bad loans, right? And then it'll take us 10 years of excavating the whole mess to find out that one didn't need to be stupid. One needed to just be there and need a home because there was all of this other stuff happening around them that foreclosed upon good decisions, right? It's not that people are often just making the poorest decision available. It's that lots of decisions are foreclosed upon for you. The reality is, if you want to, for example, go to college in the United States of America today, it helps a lot if you have always had people who are pushing you to go to college, if you had access to well-funded, equitable K-12 schools, if you had access to a safe, secure home in a safe neighborhood, if you had good nutrition, and then if you could make it to the finish line with a high school diploma, knowing about all of your college options and have all of the money and the time in the world to apply. Well, those types of decisions, if you're 24 and you didn't have those things, nothing about your decision-making at 24 is going to override the 23 years that preceded that year, right?
Right.
Those certain options are foreclosed upon for you. And that's what I mean about systematic thinking and thus not having a really good language to talk about it in popular culture. It is an easier story to write to say, oh, X person, right? Lisa decided X and look at how horrible her life is. That's an easier story to write than it is to write this big, sprawling story. But that's where the reality is and where we can usually affect the most change by understanding why do some people have some options and not others.
Right. But I wonder how much of an awareness is there of that within amongst, let's say, Black women. that it is.
Yeah, I don't know that we are different than most Americans in that we don't have much language to talk about that either. I think one of the stunning things that came out to me in the interviews I did for lower ed was how many of the students absolutely blamed themselves. Even when we would then talk in detail about, their biography and what had brought them there. And this just shows up in lots of social science work over and over again. Poor people, for example, writ large, tend to blame themselves for their own poverty. Right? Over and over again, we see that kind of language. And I think that's precisely because Black women, like most people in this country, just don't have a language to talk about the system's thinking. And if we look around, there are not a lot of politicians, certainly, who are good at talking about it.
Well,
I don't know that a lot of...
There are plenty of politicians. At the very least, we have, at the very least, one party that is completely 100% committed to making the argument that it is a failure of personal responsibility. Right. But the fact is that, the Democratic Party, even Barack Obama, the idea of personal responsibility, took the forefront a lot more than any notion of a systemic failure.
Absolutely. I take that to task actually quite a bit in an essay in the new book about the Barack Obama administration was not a departure from that language. No. He embraced wholeheartedly the idea of, cultures of poverty that create people who abdicate responsibility for themselves. And I want to be clear that, of course, there's always some individual choice, and of course, there's always individual agency. What I argue, and what lots of people like me have argued, is that we overstate how much that can change people's circumstances, while completely obscuring all of the structural stuff. There's, like you said, one party who is just ideologically opposed to the idea of a system or structure. And then on the other side, there's a party who has to sometimes give lip service to it, but that increasingly feels the need, because they're chasing some mythical center party, center voter, feels the need to double down on the idea of personal responsibility. So we really don't have a political party, a major political party, that is dedicated to using very precise language about some of the horrible predatory behaviors that happen to us in our systems.
Tressie McMillan Cottom, author of Lower Ed, The Troubling Rise of For-Profit Colleges in the New Economy, and Thick and Other Essays. I want to have you back on after I read the Thick. I hope you'll make it.
I will do that. I'm going to hold you to it, in fact, Sam.
Oh, well, I appreciate that. Thank you so much for joining us today. Really great stuff. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
All right, folks. Going to take a quick break, head into the fun half of the program. Want to remind you again, Joybird. Check it out. Joybird.com/majority. Joybird offers a one-of-a-kind furniture made to your unique tastes. You can turn your ideas into reality with hundreds of styles and options, from mid-century modern to contemporary classics, all of which are customizable in an amazing array of fabric choices, including kid and pet-friendly upholstery options. See how Joybird is revolutionizing online furniture shopping. Create the furniture that brings you joy today at joybird.com/majority. Go to joybird.com/majority. Receive an exclusive offer of 25% off your first order by using the code majority. Just a reminder, this program relies on your support. It's our members who make this show possible every day. We get some advertising, not a tremendous amount. We're working on getting more. We try. But when you become a member, not only are you supporting the free show, we give you extra content every day. You don't have to listen to it every day. You can listen to it one day a week, the extra content. You can mix and match. I don't want to listen to the first half of the show today. I want to listen to the second half. People sometimes, I just want to listen to the middle part of the show. And I have that option because I have the first and the second half. Plus, it comes to you commercial free. So check it out. JoinTheMajorityReport.com. Also, JustCoffee.coop. Fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code majority. Get 10% off. Michael, last night was Tuesday. I'm not sure if you were aware of that. But in the event that you were, what happened?
Drinks were had. There was a major mess in here that we sort of dealt with, hopefully.
I don't doubt it. Don't doubt it.
No, I'm just kidding. None of that happened. I like how Matt was like, wait, did I miss out?
Bathroom was
like, I was completely oblivious to the mess.
Daniel Bessner and I talked about what a left-wing foreign policy looks like if, say, as an example, in a Sanders presidency. We touched on the breakthrough of the Michelle Alexander column on Palestine, the launching of a Free Lula movement, Corey Pine on the RSS BJP. We connected that Tucker clip with a broader history of MLK and COINTELPRO. A lot of stuff happened. The post game for patrons, I think we gave you the right map for how to handle and respond to the Harris candidacy and reminded everybody of just what total trash Joe Biden is. Patreon.com/TMBS. Get your tickets to the live show.
Jamie, on the Intifada.
So out today, folks, we have the second ever edition of History is a Weapon, featuring a special guest, Matt Christman of Chapo Trap House. I can say who it is now. And in this special episode, Sean and Matt go over why, this question, why, of all advanced capitalist countries, is the United States unique in its historical failure to form a bona fide labor/socialist party that is organically tied to the union movement as an institutionalized political expression of working class interests? The answer may surprise you. Also, sorry, what?
Go ahead.
Also, Sean and I went on Alex Patak's weird anime podcast. It's called Ballin' Out Super. We talked about our childhoods, anime, and Marilyn Manson. So that's
Very
pretty
strange.
weird. If there's any crossover between people into leftist politics and anime, I'm told that there is. Check it out.
For some reason, I laughed when I said the Antifada because I remembered Brandon
Straka.
What is that?
Wait, that girl has what? She's with the Intifada?
You were just apathetically steamrolling over his gotcha question.
Yeah, it was.
It's a combination of Antifada and Intifada, Brandon.
Man, he really could have reached for lavender at any number of moments in that
It's true.
exchange. That was a disaster.
Literary Hangover, The House of the Seven Gables, probably the best Nathaniel Hawthorne novel. It's about a corrupt politician. I also get into how the Whig Party was sort of a zombie version of the Federalist Party that had to stop being explicitly pro-aristocracy. So there's some interesting parallels. I mean, obviously the Democrats and Whigs don't perfectly match up to modern conservative or modern Democrats and Republicans, but there's some interesting through lines.
That is interesting. I just got to say, I know we're going to go in the fun half and we'll talk about this, but like this is happening really fast in Venezuela. The major military figure has just defected, who was head of Chavez's presidential guard, has defected to the opposition, and basically, we're encouraging the head of the assembly, this guy Guaido, to just say he's president and affirm his presidency. So we're basically mid-coup. And Ro Khanna is the only Democrat in Congress so far to criticize this. So we got to give props to Ro for continuing to speak on these types of issues.
I would bet you that a full 80% of the members of Congress
don't even know what's happening.
Aren't even
right
aware
now.
of it.
I agree. Although now they're starting to tweet it at, frankly. So they're not going to have that excuse much longer.
I saw Eva Gollinger say something about they're kind of waiting on the U.S. to basically announce it. So this could be a coup by a Trump tweet.
This could be literally a coup by a Trump tweet, definitely. And this has been coordinated with the Bolsonaro regime. And, of course, this is all coming on the heels of confirmation that the gang that killed Marielle Franco might be literally in business relationships with Bolsonaro's family.
Well, a coincidence. I'm sure it's a coincidence.
I'm sure whatever it is, it's good for Wall Street.
And the I guess the good news is it doesn't look like we're going to be invading.
No,
until after we need to
yeah.
be brought in for peacekeeping, right?
Yeah,
is that basically the way that works?
Yeah, we'll see.
So
all of the problems that are legitimate about Maduro are going to be worse by like a combination of like cartel military defectors and U.S. backed austerity bots.
Right.
Like There's nothing that's not going to get worse.
But it's going to be done in service of essentially the IMF principles.
IMF,
right? I mean,
World
that's
Bank
basically
principles, and getting U.S. oil companies totally back encumbered. By the way, Venezuela's oil was made public well before Chavez, and his critique was not, we're going to make, the oil was not already not privatized. He just said, we're going to take this public oil and distribute it for healthcare and education. And that's what's going to get
the cash.
We're going to take the cash from
Right.
what is already a public resource and invest it in people, and that's going to be first on the chopping block with this.
Yep. So the suffering of the Venezuelan people will not end, but it will come for a greater good, and that is to enrich the wealthiest in that society, and no longer, a big part of the problem has been essentially the way that they what was happening with their currency, and largely because we had shut off their opportunities to engage in the international financial system. And so you ended up having a tremendous amount of, I don't even know if I would call it corruption as much as thievery, because it opened up the opportunity for people to steal large amounts of money from the Venezuelan government and from different agencies. So this will, you got to wonder if this will even make the news.
Will make Fox News because it will fit into their narrative.
But I would be surprised if there is more than 30 seconds on this
on TV news.
Cable
Well,
news.
here's an angle. Ava Gollinger just tweeted this, and this is very possible, and this will get it into the MSNBC matrix, which is it's possible right now that Venezuela might have two governments, one recognized by Russia and China, and another recognized by the United States. So if there's some type of Russia angle, I could imagine it go Russia.
Right, it's possible.
It's like, but it won't fit then, because if according to that narrative, Trump would then have to be like, Maduro's a great guy. I just got off the phone with Putin.
Exactly.
My mistake. He should be back in control of the presidency.
Putin released me on this one. This is a vote I can make.
Yeah. Putin's like, I understand Monroe Doctrine imperialism.
Right.
Go for it.
Go.
So how would
I get the next one?
How would, say, a President Bernie deal with this situation as a left internationalist?
He could have already stopped sanctioning members, starting to strangle the Venezuelan economy. Like, that would have been the first step. I mean, he easily could have been in a position, in fact, a better position, to stop strangling the economy and say, actually, I share a lot of your goals, and you need to stop messing up in X, Y, and Z, and I'll do direct above-board diplomacy about it. I mean, that one would be easy. Stop by interfering.
Stop creating the problem.
Yeah, precisely.
What a concept.
All right. We got to head into the fun half. 646-257-3920 is the number. See you in the fun half. We are back. It's the fun half, ladies and gentlemen, of the Majority Report. Hey, do we still have those AOC clips from yesterday?
We have 2 of them, and then we have a new thing.
What happened to the old ones?
Well, I got rid of one of the Colbert ones because it was kind of flat, and I think I got rid of another one. But
how many times? How much promotion does Colbert need from us? Anyways?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, give me a break.
But we also have one that's sort of Ryan Saavedra. He's some sort of fascist propagandist saying, "Here's AOC suggesting that algorithms are racist, but algorithms are math." Which so I subbed that one into for a new one.
Oh my God, it is really. All right, let's.
John Schwartz said something like 94% of conservative freak out is taking something that's like objectively true. It'd be like, can you believe that?
That's what Ben Shapiro does whenever AOC talks about climate change too.
It's ridiculous. She's so irrelevant. Let me just say that for the 50th time today.
Debate me, you stupid. Oh.
Debate me.
Dave Rubin, Dave Rubin. I've crossed the Dave Rubin line.
The Rubicon.
I'm not allowed to. I'm not allowed to debate anybody I called stupid.
That's rude.
That's the Dave Rubin line.
What is the Rubicon? That's like did Ben Shapiro cross the Rubicon when he said he wouldn't bake a cake or have his?
No, I think
he might have.
No. Well, Rubin gets to define the. Dave Rubin will not debate somebody who had an associate call him stupid, but he will endlessly promote somebody who won't recognize his relationship.
There you go.
Galaxy brain.
Calling from a 206 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, this is Priya. I'm calling from Seattle.
Priya? Is that your name?
Yes.
Hi, Priya. What's on your mind?
Yeah. So I guess I was calling because I've been listening for a long time, but I had to take a year off after Trump got elected because I was so upset, I guess, but with politics in general. But I subscribed to you and TYT, but I actually unsubscribed for a while or suspended my membership because of Jimmy Dore, because I was just so aghast at his response and everything. I thought once Trump got elected he would come to his senses, or I don't know, be like I'm wrong or something like that. But I was just wondering if anyone has kind of brought up to him or to any of these people who still are trying to go with the electability and you're forcing us into voting out of fear. If anyone has really brought up the point that their privilege is kind of taking over their common sense in this, that it's a privileged position to be able to kind of deny all the rights that are being taken away or that are being, or all the hate that's being fomented and stuff like that. He's saying that it's a moral position to, have the perfect candidate or whatever, but he's not looking at the immorality of everyone that's being hurt by the policies.
I mean, let's be honest. If he was Haitian and his son or his dad or his mom or his sister was being threatened with being sent back out of the country to go back to, a place where maybe their house was destroyed in an earthquake, he would probably have a slightly different sense of this. If he was, he was a federal worker, he might have a different. I mean, and everyone in between, right?
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's been mentioned to him. Let me just check in with my work wife. I'm sorry.
Yes, Democratic submissive.
That's an inside joke that I'm not quite sure where it comes from, but it is it's funny to me.
Oh, it comes from a YouTuber.
Oh no, I'm not sure.
But, right.
We're not.
I missed the joke.
Well, I actually
well
have
done.
one other question just about Democrats, though. With the whole Social Security and how people and quote unquote entitlements, which actually started out calling them welfare, but really they're Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, whatever.
Right.
Why do we go along with that messaging?
Well, I don't. I mean, it's social insurance, and and everybody pays into it. Everybody gets it back out. Medicare is an extraordinary deal in terms of what you put in and what you get back out. Social Security is a decent deal. You get back, more or less what you put back in, with maybe a slight bump in interest payments, but it's there for you at the end, and it should be expanded. But yeah, why do some people do that? I don't know. I don't do that. But
because Republicans, is it George Bush that was it Karl Rove that had all the I can't remember the messaging, and like the talking points and whatnot. But why? I mean, because Obama wanted to do the whole Social Security and the over entitlement reform and whatnot. But it's like, why are we even doing that? And why are we going? Because saying someone's entitled to something, it's like, we're not entitled. We paid for it. And Cenk Huber and the TYT, kind of the commercial where he goes, damn it, they failed us. We paid for that, and they're stealing it from us. And they talk about, they're trying to reallocate resources and they're trying to transfer money to the poor people or whatever. But it's really they're transferring it to the top, and nobody really talks about that. When they're reforming what we paid for, they're also stealing it to give it to big companies.
Oh, without a doubt. Priya, I don't know how old you are. I don't know if you remember Al Gore in the 2000 election. Everybody was making fun of him talking about the lockbox. And what he was basically saying is that we have set aside, we have borrowed from the Social Security Trust Fund, cannot statutorily add to the deficit. It is its own funding mechanism that runs in parallel to the rest of the U.S. government. And we borrowed from the Social Security Trust Fund, and he wanted to create a lockbox so that money that you cannot dip in to borrow from that to pay for other things, essentially usually tax cuts, for the U.S. government. Now, despite the fact that there are IOUs there, and George Bush in 2005, when he was trying to privatize it, said, I just went down to some basement with some file cabinets, said, no money here, just pieces of paper that say IOU. Those are actually promissory notes from the U.S. government. We've never defaulted on those in the entire history of the country, and there's no reason to believe that we would default on them now. So
excuse me, I'm trying. This is... But Haitian Jimmy Dore needs to happen.
Well, we'll do.
My aunt said she will get deported. I said, you don't vote out of fucking fear. Are you going to vote for fucking fear? Then you will be deported. I'm sorry. I'm going to vote for the fucking Green New fucking Deal, so I feel pretty good about myself.
Priya, it was good to hear back from you. Thanks for calling in. Try us again, too.
You're voting for fucking fear. You don't do this. You don't vote for fucking fear. Maybe you go back to Port-au-Prince and reconstruct the city. Maybe that is fucking better. Then you have the fucking revolution.
The moon could fall into the Port-au-Prince.
Yes, the moon could.
It's actually a Haitian folktale.
That's right. That's right.
Boston Blue could be flooded again. You'll never fucking know, but I'm not going to vote for fucking fear. No fear fucking voting for me. That's why you are a fucking sellout. Did you see Tulsi Gabbard on the TV? Oh my God, she's bring a surge of sugar in my blood when I see her in bikini suit. But she opposed fucking war. And some say that do not because he is a fucking sellout.
That is a very strange Haitian accent.
Yeah, it's bad.
It's bad. I'm trying to think
bad.
I'm sitting there really going.
I mean, not that you would know what that accent is.
No, I do.
But,
I do. I do. Well, I mean,
I do.
Talked to people from Haiti before.
From Haiti before?
Are you repeating what I'm saying?
People.
I'm just wondering where this big, broad socializing comes from.
I did for a moment say, wow, I don't remember anybody from Haiti ever sounding like that.
I don't know if I remember anyone sounding like that.
I love when somebody says.
Well,
I love how people with no accent. Yeah, it's like a slight French one. That's right. And people with no impression capacity should not be critiquing impressions.
Excuse me.
Well, look,
why don't you just look in my direction?
That was definitely a look in your direction. No, you do Bush. That wasn't targeted.
Well, I'm just saying, when it's your core brand proposition,
you have one impression. You have one
woman
impression
sounds
that's good.
like she.
I like what somebody said.
From China.
Somebody said on the Discord, this character needs more work, preferably done on air every day.
All right,
boy.
Let's. AOC was on Colbert's show the other night, and we alluded to this yesterday, but it is stunning that certainly at the very least, I mean, I have been paying attention to politics every day in a way that I think would make most people physically ill for almost, for 15 years. And I cannot recall anyone on cable television, certainly not network television, making the point that the typical top marginal tax rates from the 50s through really until Reagan were anywhere from 90 some odd percent to I think 70, 75%. And that's on the top margin. If you're making what would be equivalent to about $3 million a year now. And yet it is all over the place now. And here is a network television show, granted, not a news show. It's on a talk show where you'll hear it again.
I got to get into one policy issue with you here is that you have proposed a 70% tax on rich folks. Now, I have no dog in this fight. I'm just curious, how would that work? And I want to say, I just want to say, yay! What and
so I think this is.
What if some of the money's in the Cayman Islands?
Yeah.
How would that work?
So I think this is something that we often see too with Fox News. It's like they want to take all your money, and when we talk about a 70% marginal tax rate, it's not on all of your income. It's on your 10 millionth and $1. So after you make $10 million in 1 year, your dollars after that start to get progressively taxed at a much higher rate. And really what that is that it's the tax interpretation of one answer to the question of how much is at what level are we really just living in excess, and what kind of society do we want to live in, and do we want to live in a city, for example, do we want to live in a city where billionaires have their own personal Uber helipads when people...
You can get those?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Because the traffic in Lincoln Tunnel sucks.
Yeah.
Okay, good to know. Sorry, go ahead.
So do we want these kind of, folks with helipads in the same city and the same society as people who are working 80-hour weeks and can't feed their kids?
And this kind of tax rate was the norm up until the early 80s.
It was. This is not a new idea. In fact, people are yelling, she's a socialist. She wants 70% marginal tax rates. Under Republican administration, Dwight Eisenhower, we had 90% marginal tax rates.
Wow.
Yeah.
But I want to point out that she's a socialist. She wants 70% tax rates. Those are both accurate, right?
Yeah, I guess so.
Okay.
Democratic, though.
Democratic socialist. Democratic socialist.
Very different.
Okay.
Very different.
There you go. I mean, I don't think if you 6 weeks ago had lined up every news anchor in television and asked them to explain top marginal tax rates, that they could explain it to you. And now people who watch late night TV get it.
Well, it also has a viral component too. Like, you could maybe have tried to crowbar it into an interview, but no, they're going to be like, we're going to cut this from the show, obviously.
Right. I mean, the interesting thing was, like, you never had conversations where it would be appropriate to mention that more often than not. I mean, certainly, maybe back when you're having arguments about tax cuts. But it's super healthy for the country.
This is something that the right has done for a really long time when they're trying to push the Overton window to the right, right? Like they talk about things that sound crazy at first, and they just keep talking about them on whatever platforms they have access to until finally it becomes like a mainstream acceptable position. And that's what she's doing on the left, and I think it's great.
I've told the story before, but Janine Garofalo and I think I was like hosting, and she was a guest ostensibly, and we were doing like a comedy show, like a talk. It was supposed to be a light thing at the Aspen Ideas Festival. And one of the guests was a New York Times reporter. I can't remember who it was. The other guest was Grover Norquist, Club for Growth. And this was this was before I was doing this version of the show. So it was probably 2010, 2009. And I swear to you, it was supposed to be a light thing. It wasn't videotaped. There's no video of it. It wasn't just going, there was maybe, I don't know, 200 people, 300 people in the room. And it was supposed to be light. As much as I loathed Grover Norquist, I was sort of interested to see, just like what this guy's like. And I would ask him any question, literally any question. And his response was, public sector workers are doing really well with their pensions, and it's unfair to the rest of us.
So he was workshopping his public sector pensions material.
He was workshopping, and and if you go back to 2009 and start listening to Rush Limbaugh in 2010, they're pushing on this, and then of course it ultimately ends up with like a tax on these pensions, and we saw public sector workers. I mean, part of that thrust was ended in the Janus case, frankly, but. Yeah, it's nice. It's nice to see this stuff being mainstreamed. And while we're talking about AOC explaining to viewers of late night TV on CBS what marginal tax rates mean, and probably explaining that to the vast majority of Americans, which is probably maybe even in the news department, here she is with Ta-Nehisi Coates. And what was this function? I'm not exactly sure what this was. This was at a MLK Day event, MLK Now.
This was at the venue where MLK gave his
Riverside.
Riverside Church?
Riverside
okay.
Church.
Yeah, it's up at the Riverside Church, uptown in New York City. And when we talk about and you don't hear this too much, just the idea of one person hoarding the world's wealth. And the other day, I think we reported 26 people. 26 people.
It's the new Oxfam report.
Have more wealth than 3.8 billion people. Contemplate this for a moment. 26 people. We could fit 26 people in here without any problem. I don't think we could fit 3,000 on the floor of this building. And to contemplate what 3.8 billion people is just absurd. There is no way that if you have any, and I generally don't talk in terms of morals, because but there's just no way that you can hold on to any type of moral system and say that makes sense. That's right.
No, it's like the Grand Canyon of inequality.
It's yes,
each year, by the way, they release that report each year. Oxfam does to illustrate this dynamic, and it's like each year it's unbelievably obscene, and each year it gets worse.
And people should understand
narrows.
what this represents too. It represents a tremendous amount of suffering that any one of those 26 people could alleviate, or that society could alleviate by not allowing those 26 people to own that type of wealth.
Every billionaire is a policy failure.
And that's without even addressing the political implications of that. Because I got news for you. Those 26 people have far more political power than those 3.8 billion at this point because of the way that we have structured things. Here is Ta-Nehisi Coates speaking with AOC.
do you think it is moral for individuals to, for instance, do we live in a moral world that allows for billionaires? Is that a moral outcome in and of itself?
It's not. It's not. And it's not, and I think it's important to say that I don't think that necessarily means that all billionaires are immoral. It is not to say that someone like Bill Gates, for example, or Warren Buffett are immoral people. I do not believe that. But I believe
that he kicks his dog.
Right,
like
that. I don't, I'm not saying that. But I do think a system that allows billionaires to exist when there are parts of Alabama where people are still getting ringworm because they don't have access to public health is wrong. And I think it's wrong that I think that it's wrong that a vast majority of the country does not make a living wage. I think it's wrong that you can work 100 hours and not feed your kids. I think it's wrong that that corporations like Walmart and Amazon can get paid. They can get paid for by the government, essentially experience a wealth transfer from the public for paying people less than a minimum wage. And it not only doesn't make economic sense, but it doesn't make moral sense, and it doesn't make societal sense.
What's stunning about these two clips, right, with AOC on Colbert and sitting there with Ta-Nehisi Coates in what looks like is done like almost like with a Broadway drop back, is that these ideas, which were considered so radical that you could not access them except for like on a YouTube show, are now in like being released in the most mainstream of contexts. And that's what's so stunning about all this, is that not that anybody's saying these things, that's great that she's saying them, but what's amazing is that it's being said in calm tones on highly produced sets, broadcast out to millions of people as if we were talking about, the way that on a Sunday morning talk show, like we must go in and attack this nation or whatever it is. Like it's all getting like the idea that this has equal billing to some of the worst ideas ever is I think is extraordinary. And there had to be somebody. It was inevitable, I think, to a certain extent, with the context that was going on. I mean, Bernie opened the door to a lot of these conversations. I mean, frankly, Occupy opened the door to the conversations about wealth inequality in a way that we hadn't seen. I mean, it was out there. This show started in November of 2010, and I think the first guest that we had on when we started having guests in November was Winner Take All, about that very dynamic of wealth inequality, but it wasn't in the mainstream conversation until a year later with Occupy. And, one thing builds on another. So it had to be somebody, but certainly in terms of AOC has, I think, sort of busted through just because she's incredibly well-spoken, intelligent, and then, I mean, this stuff it's nuts. It's nuts.
Yeah, it's the combination of her amazing personality and poise and her good ideas that people really like.
All right, lastly, let's just hear this last one because the right wing, it's fun to watch them try and find anything. And they're
ringworm? What the hell is that?
Ringworm? Why is she bringing up ringworm?
Why would such an ugly term come out of such a pretty mouth? And she never experienced socialism.
Well, this is the thing, is that you do get the sense that the right is just not sure what to do. Like this guy, Ryan Savita. Now, I I saw that he had
he's a
tweeted
Daily
this.
Wire guy.
Yeah, he's blocked me for whatever reason. I'm not sure why.
He's quick on the block. Yeah,
he's quick on the block.
I've never heard of him in my entire life. I
Maybe
wouldn't know
one
why
day he
that
was doing a creative visualization exercise for his career arc, and he hit a couple of metrics, and he's like, "Oh shit, this is when I have to dodge a debate."
Right,
with
exactly.
Sam Seder on
at
Social
one
Security
point, at one
timetables.
point,
Yeah.
Seder may come after me, so I'm going to. This is just like a What is that? The precog.
I got to do it. Yeah,
I'm going to
precognition.
pre-block him.
Pre-block, preemptive. I
Getting
don't
out
want to
in front
look
of it.
like a total
But here's-
weakling like Steven Crowder or Dave Rubin.
Here is the problem that they have, and I imagine that they probably sit around the office and go, "Is this a good idea? Does this make sense? Like, are we doing more harm than good?" I mean, at one point they have to ask themselves because they're so desperate to find something that is going to stick, and it's not. And every time they do, there's almost this like self-own where it's like, oh, wait a second, that's an interesting thing I should look into. Socialist rep Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez claims that algorithms, which are driven by math, are racist. Does she really? Let's hear.
Look at, IBM was creating facial recognition technology to target, to do kind of crime profiling, or you see over and over again, whether it's FaceTime, they always have these racial inequities that get translated because algorithms are still made by human beings.
Right.
And those algorithms are still pegged to those two basic human assumptions.
Right.
They're just automated. And automated assumptions, it's like if you don't fix the bias, then you're automating the bias. And that gets even more dangerous.
So really what this guy should be saying is socialist, here, turn down, socialist, I'll fix this. Socialist rep Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez explains to me the very basic principle that your outputs are a function of your inputs in math. And thus, if you start with some racially biased inputs into an algorithm, your output is necessarily going to be racist.
I mean,
and here is
Osita Nwanevu, I think you pronounce it. He has found some old tweets about Ryan complaining about algorithms and
algorithms
being biased
having a
against
liberal
conservatives.
bias.
Oh, that's funny. Tech companies tend to be liberal and something is off with their algorithms because they won't show a lot of content I find by manual search.
Wow, that's
Breaking.
perfect.
Facebook algorithm is targeting Trump's page significantly more than Democratic politicians. Most people get their news on Facebook, which allows advertisers to target their customers in certain zip codes. Who's to say Facebook isn't altering what news people see in specific voting districts? There needs to be oversight of Facebook's algorithms, operations, and news distribution.
It's just math, right?
Yeah, they're literally driven by math.
Well,
Ryan.
that's racism
Here's what I would
against
say,
white
though.
people, which is totally different.
Ryan, I don't want to burden you, and I'm sure if I haven't been blocked already, I'll be blocked for this. But a couple years ago on this show, we interviewed an author called Kathy O'Neill, who wrote one of the best books. I think one of the most important books, kind of under the radar. It's been
Math
written in the
Babe,
past.
she goes by.
Yeah, Math Babe on Twitter, and it's called Weapons of Math Destruction. And she explains how it's not only race, it's poverty, and it affects everything from policing, employment, home loans, insurance, advertising. That actually all of these algorithms are driven by essentially social hierarchy and ahistorical, bigoted, and class-structured inputs, which lead to really bad outcomes, even worse than stories about how bad Donald Trump's skin tone looks on Facebook.
But anybody
I would check it out.
Anybody who knows math knows that your outputs are a function of your inputs.
I don't know math because I stick to the core brand of this show. But
It's better just to say math is on your side than to actually know math.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, that's right.
I think the math backs me up on this one.
Meanwhile, the obsession of the right about AOC is stunning. It is always creepy to have Ben Stein comment on anyone.
Oh, you serious? Dude?
Who is...
We got Ben Stein out of the crypt.
Yes.
They are all so
Do you
thirsty
remember
for her.
The last time we heard from Ben Stein, wasn't there
was-
some controversy about his approach toward women? Am I
don't
forgetting that?
remember.
Ooh, I'm gonna look that up.
I think there was there was some type of
financial domination.
Yes, there was some type of
That's shocking.
Oh wow,
And
he,
so
he
the-
made a whole show around that.
So is he out today to thank AOC for giving him another couple years in life expectancy because he's so thirsty for her? Is that what we're playing?
His new show, Withhold Ben Stein's Money.
Wow, little did those people know they were all involved in his FinDom fantasy.
Here is FinDom Ben Stein talking about AOC
He's a pay
and how she's I mean, I guess she's what is it? Is she kink shaming him by calling for a 70% marginal tax rate? Here we go.
Was learning that. I mean, they've tried, right? They tried, and Hugo Chavez had all kinds of promises, just like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Maduro had the same kind of promises. In fact, and we're going to show this a little bit later, the former vice president, Delcy Rodriguez, I say former because we no longer recognize her regime there with Maduro, she'll sit there and tell you with a straight face that Venezuela...
Pause it. Wait a second. I guess we should just also add, like, apparently Fox got the notice early.
Fox did. And let me just say, I recognize Nancy Pelosi as president.
There you go.
Certainly new editorial guidelines when I'm hosting.
She'll sit there and tell you with a straight face that Venezuela is the model of the world, despite the fact that 90% of the people live in poverty. Venezuela has figured it out. I just hope, Ben, we don't go through the same kind of incarnations and challenges that they have had to deal with.
Wait, when... Somebody happened with the clip? Well, that was, we did have the, oh, here we go.
On education, I mean, we have a society.
Oh, we got a real problem with Ben Stein.
It's okay. Ben Stein was so boring that he actually ruined the algorithm because the inputs were off. The Ben Stein input ruined the whole process.
It depends on education. I mean, we have a society in which there are an awful lot of people who have no idea that Stalin, Hitler, Mao Zedong all came to power promising the same kinds of things that Ms. Ocasio-Cortez is promising, and it led to mass murder, led to dictatorship, it led to genocide. These promises are old promises, and they invariably lead to bad things. The promise of just saying to people, do what you can within the law to make your life better and your family's life better, that system works extremely well. Capitalism is a system that allows people to make something of themselves instead of oppressing other people. It's an incredibly good system. Making money is one of the most harmless things there is to do in the whole world, and that's what our society is about. It's not about ordering people around, putting them in concentration camps. What do you do if a person is a richer person and a poorer person? What do? You take him away? Do you shoot him? Well, that's what the communist.
You know what you could do? You could just tax him.
You could also just tax him.
Tax
A
him.
lot of Stalin's purges, though, were driven by disagreements on marginal rates.
I love the fact that somehow we've gone to 70% tax rate, going to a tax rate that was in existence just prior to Ronald Reagan. Well, it must have been in existence during Reagan, before his tax overhaul, is the functional equivalent of concentration camps.
If Mao was alive today, he would be playing Donkey Kong with H. Bomber Guy to support transgender teenagers.
As DHS is requesting more beds and things like that.
Absolutely. Yes.
But the fact that these folks even have to feel the need to defend capitalism right now is so cool. It means that they're on the defensive.
Well, not only does it mean they're on the defensive, what I think is also great about it is I think that they talk about like getting high in your own supply. They actually really thought that when this stuff was actually put forward, that most people were on their side. They would just innately go, oh, well, that's crazy because, you know, Venezuela and Hitler, and now they're doing it. And then it's actually most people are like, what? She's not. I think she's talking about a marginal tax rate that will get people health care. You lunatic!
I mean,
Cold War is over.
It's reminiscent on some level of like when they used to say like Obama practices Chicago style politics, and everybody above, you know, like below the age of like 65 is just like, what? What does that mean? Like pizza?
Or on a smaller scale, as I always say, I guess you got to give them props now for universal daycare and healthcare and NYC proposal, but the coolest thing about de Blasio when he was running for mayor was like, okay, he ran as the liberal against centrist, so he was already the pick. And then the New York Post tried to make a whole like, he went and hung out with the Sandinistas in the 80s. I was like, Oh, all right, you big goofy beanstalk. You might be a lot cooler than I thought.
Well, it's like what Jamie said about the Cold War. They're really operating with the sort of Cold War training wheels on all these arguments.
Right,
and now those are gone.
Yeah, that doesn't work on people anymore.
And strong emphasis on training wheels.
Just in defense of Ben Stein, this is the only way he's going to get on TV again, though, is if he says stuff like, she's basically advocating concentration camps.
Yeah, he should only be on TV for like Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Like,
Repeats.
Hey, it was 30 years ago this movie came out. You want to do the Bueller line again?
It was a little bit longer than that, I think. Calling from a 607 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? 607.
Hey, Sam. My name's Dan. I'm calling from Cow Country, New York.
Cow Country, New York. Hi, Dan. What's on your mind?
Well, I'm just wondering if you guys have any thoughts on the Elizabeth Warren candidacy, and you can either talk me off my cynic's ledge or reinforce my deepest, darkest fears, because I feel like it came along at just the right time to try to maybe suck some wind out of the whole AOC fandom going on.
Well, I think... I mean, I have thoughts on her candidacy, but I will say this, that, Warren, there were a lot of people who thought that she might run in 2016. So this is not coming out of the blue. I'm quite sure that Bernie Sanders was waiting before he entered the race in 2016 to see what Warren was doing. So I think there may be people who are excited about a Warren candidacy because they do see it as a way of, foreclosing maybe a Bernie run or but I don't think that her candidacy is a function in any way of the some forces trying to steal the thunder from AOC.
It's like Mao and Zhou Enlai.
Well, no, not
just to think of an appropriate.
I don't necessarily mean. Right, I don't necessarily mean steal the thunder from AOC, but I mean as a Bernie prophylactic.
Oh, well, I think she may be being used in that way by some people. Some people may see her that way, but she's not running to be a Bernie prophylactic. There's no doubt in my mind. I mean, I think she's very sincere with her politics. And again, Bernie was waiting in 2016 to see if she was going to run. And if she had run, he would not have.
Are you saying you think that she's specifically a candidate of like some type of, sort of interests in the Democratic Party that want to undermine people like Bernie and AOC? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I'm saying that I believe that she is, I think, sincere because she has been saying the right things for a long time, but I'm not sure how much she's actually willing to do. And I do think that she would be the perfect shiny bauble to dangle out to sort of draw people over to a candidate who may never actually be able to get some of the things done.
I mean, look, I think she's incredibly competent, and I don't know what Bernie's going to do in terms of entering the race. But if our worst case scenario is that Elizabeth Warren is president, we're in great shape.
Yeah.
If the right wing of the party,
I agree with you there.
If the right wing of the party were trying to find someone to be a Bernie prophylactic, it would be someone to the right of Warren, I would say, like a Kamala Harris type. They would only get behind Warren if it seemed like the only other choice was Bernie.
Right. I think, though, that these people aren't unintelligent. They know that people who really want a progressive agenda aren't going to fall for a Cory Booker or a Kamala Harris.
I wouldn't be so confident. I think you're giving them too much credit. I think that, look, I don't know. I'm not sure how much legs Warren's candidacy has, but I don't buy a sort of conspiracy about why she's running.
Yeah, I agree. So. I appreciate the call. I'll remind you of this, and I think you spoke to the guy, right? There was a reporter from Politico who called me in 2015. Do you remember that?
You spoke to him.
Yeah, but didn't you give me the guy's name? I can't remember who it was.
I don't remember.
There was a reporter from Politico who called me in early 2015, and he said, I'm doing a story on Martin O'Malley, and the angle is he's trying to figure out how to steal the progressive thunder from Elizabeth Warren. And I was like, Elizabeth Warren, she's not even running. He's got to worry about Bernie. And the guy, I promise you, laughed. And I'm like, I'm serious. Bernie is what Martin O'Malley should be worried about, not Elizabeth Warren. That's how clueless they were. Well, that tells you two things. One, it tells you how much sentiment there was out there that Elizabeth Warren could run and genuinely challenge Clinton. And two, that's how clueless they were to the appeal that Bernie had in that sector.
Totally. And I think that, there might be, I think it's actually tricky for her because the map is so different now. But I actually think I don't necessarily think cynically of the Obama people that have signed on with her, because I think there are some people in that orbit that are center left in the proper definition of that word, and they would find a candidate like her pretty appealing.
Well, they also saw up front how effective she was at
and they said, and if you go back actually to some of the things, definitely not all of the things, but some of the things Obama talked about in 2007, he was reading Elizabeth Warren. He was actually talking about these things. So there are people in his orbit, and obviously he pointed her, but she was definitely fighting a lot of battles against the dominant economic team. But I think there's people around her that, they're not as left as Bernie. They don't have as sort of robust a politics. But on the other hand, they're not Beto or Biden people. They're center left, and she represents that.
Let's go to the phones. Calling from a 478 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Sam, in some parts, I'm just known as Awesome Bob from the County Cobb, but you could, of course, call me Jeff in Georgia.
Jeff in Georgia. How are you, Jeff? Are we going to see you in a week or so?
Yeah, man, I'm super excited. Yeah, next week, next Thursday, I'm flying in, man. I'm
all right.
in LaGuardia that morning. It's amazing.
We'll be in touch, and we'll get you into the studio.
Yeah, absolutely, my man.
But gotta jump.
Fantastic.
Gotta jump.
Oh.
No, I was joking
Sam,
about your
performance.
You
left me on hold 90 minutes yesterday. You didn't even say my name. I know that was me. You see my area code.
There's honestly, like today, 29 people on the line, and there's no way I can memorize all those area codes.
I'll try to be quick because I really just have one thing to add. I freaking loved your guest. I freaking loved your interview. I really did. I really like how she gave a lot of material analysis about how this industry just sprung up. I want to talk a little bit about student loan debt. Generally speaking, I went to a public university, of course. I do hold a bachelor's degree, but I do still have student debt. Not as much as some, but some, and almost everyone I know my age does. And what's insidious about it to me is, I'm 30. I'll be 34 this year. I grew up. Everyone told me. My grandparents on both sides. My mom, my dad, all my friends, all my teachers. You go to school. You try hard. That's the only way forward. You listen to politicians talk, about poverty on the Democratic and Republican side. There's huge consensus. Their answer is education.
Yeah.
Right now, some of them want to mouth off about technical colleges and 2-year degrees or trade schools or apprenticeships or whatever, but it's all the same. It's all just education, right? But what breaks my heart is I really want to believe that knowledge is its own reward, that education is its own treasure, and that my education experiences have made me who I am, and that's great. I wish I like to like who I am. That would be good, and I think most people feel the same, but I feel like this is a trap. I do, because I feel like a lot of my education, to be honest with you, for me and a lot of people my age, it hasn't gotten us the life that we wanted.
Right.
And not all of us are cut out to be good in school. I was good as hell at school, but a lot of people aren't cut out for that.
But
either.
I think,
and with that, we're not even talking about them.
But look, I think there is value to going to college that is not one that can be measured in terms of return on investment that comes in dollars. But with that said, I think it's also the case that return on investment may not be worth the cost of essentially some form of indentured servitude to the bank that lent you the money. And therefore, as a society, we should be providing that experience for free, because the return on investment, frankly, I think has as much of a return, and maybe more so, to society at large than it does the individual. Like, I think like the idea of college, broadly speaking, for as many people as we can have go, in terms of them being exposed to an array of new ideas, right? Where we have people who are exposed to new ideas as a citizenship, not even like being taught civics necessarily, but just the idea that people are going to college and you're going to be exposed to new ideas. And I think that's important for your population to have
the
that.
main reason you go to school, I think, is I mean, you do go to learn, but you also go to be socialized.
Exactly.
You don't need education that professor that will tell you, like, that's really the primary function of schooling in this country, at least. I'll just throw out one more thing. We talk on this show, I know, and a little bit of the Democratic Party, not as much as I'd like, about free college and student loan forgiveness. That'd be great. I would love to throw out there, if this is such a great societal good, as you say, and I absolutely agree, we should also be paying these students just to study. You should be able to afford to go to school full time, live a decent life, not have to worry about doing a job on the side, I'd say. That'd just be something yeah, man. All right, Majority Reporter, I'll let you get to some more people. Y'all have a good one now.
Jeff from Georgia, folks.
Jeff is so wise.
We don't.
But like, this is the problem with
no drop. Wow.
This is the problem with this prevailing neoliberal approach to policy. Like, if you can't talk about something in dollars and cents, it doesn't deserve to exist. So, they still insist that education is the answer to like raising wages, fixing economic problems, blah, blah, blah. We know that that's not true. Like, people have a right to an education because they have a right to an education. And when you talk about it in that way, it puts it in a totally different paradigm.
Yeah, and I think it's just, frankly, it just benefits society to have an educated population. Like, just not even, economically, sure, but just in terms of, like,
a citizenry.
Yeah, well, that has no value under capitalism. Like, its value is zero.
It used to. It used
the
to have
system.
more so.
Its value
more
to
so.
human beings is real.
My answer is education.
Well, there's in Democracy in
Tony Blair
Chains.
said that.
In Democracy in Chains, Nancy McLean quotes Milton Friedman being like, "These college kids in the 70s are getting out of hand. We need to make them have some skin in the game."
Right. That's right. That was the key, right? I mean, there was a lot of Tom Hartman, one of his books, I can't remember what it is, talked about this, that there was such economic stability and security amongst the middle class in the 60s that the idea that you could go out and get arrested for protesting, fine. I'll go find another, find a job. Like, none of this, there was no sense of, like, to the extent that there were consequences, the consequences were not, you're going to be punished economically by society. And that scared a lot of people. And Greenspan hinted at that too, to a certain extent. Not so much in terms of social control, but he said that as a member of the Fed, that part of their job was to create a certain amount of economic insecurity so that the markets worked more efficiently, as it were. So,
God, you can't solve market problems with market solutions.
Here is a different show than ours. Apparently, one that is now. Is this on TV? Is this the HBO version of the show? Or is this just like
I don't know. Really.
I don't know if any of us followed it closely enough to know that.
Yeah.
Because I know they have an HBO show, and I wonder if this is just this just must be their podcast set.
I used to listen for impressions, but I haven't copped it for
the
a
only
long
thing,
time. But
well,
this is a good signal here.
Yeah. All right. So let's. This is sort of interesting. Kristen Gillibrand goes on to the wrong show after announcing that she's going to run for president in terms of what she wants, greater exposure and whatnot. And here is one of the hosts, John Favreau, and not to be confused with John Lovitz, who's like the comedy guy, right? Yeah, Favreau.
He's really funny.
He's very funny.
And not to be confused with the other John Favreau, who
Right.
I thought was the same person for a long time.
That other John
You mean the guy who
Favreau
was
was
in
the guy.
Sopranos, where he played a film director.
That's right.
Yeah, that guy.
Yeah, named
I
John
took that
Favreau.
dude for about I don't know, $150 one night in poker.
What happened? Why did you stop your run? Did he spray some lavender?
No, I just we only played one game. We played one night. Anyways, the John Favreau, whose money I did not take at a game of poker, interviewing Senator Kristen Gillibrand, and good for him for asking some rather pointed questions.
At best, you as president would have a Democratic majority in the House and a narrow Senate majority. Certainly not 60 votes, right, after this election. So there are no Senate Republicans in favor of Medicare for All. Probably very few in favor of a big program like Green New Deal or something like that. As president, would you push, hopefully, Majority Leader Chuck Schumer to get rid of the filibuster so you can pass something like Medicare for All or a Green New Deal?
The filibuster is mostly gone now, so it barely exists. No, I think.
Well, that's why I'm sort of thinking like.
It barely exists. It barely exists. There's pretty much a 51 vote threshold now for everything.
Right.
The only part we had left in place was for Supreme Court justices, and Mitch just took that away. So I think it's useful to bring people together, and I don't mind that you have to get 60 votes for cloture because you're trying to get people to a point where, and that's a term of art for your listeners. It just means that you're done with debate, and so you will urge people to have at least 60 votes to say we're done with debate. That's not an unreasonable goal, because if people don't feel like you're done with debate and that they haven't been heard enough, maybe you should debate a little more. And I think government only works when people who care deeply stand up and fight for what they believe in, and know how important their voices are. And so if you're not able to get 60 votes on something, it just means you haven't worked hard enough talking to enough people and trying to listen to their concerns and then coming up with a solution that they can support. So I'm not afraid of it one way or the other. Because
But you'd be open to getting rid of it for something big like Medicare for All.
I don't think we should have gotten rid of it for the Supreme Court justices because they're lifetime appointments. And I do think you should be able to earn at least 60 votes.
Yeah.
But I'll think about it. I believe I can work well under either system, because if you don't have 60 votes yet, it just means you haven't done enough advocacy and you need to work a lot harder.
All right, I got to say, look, that's bad. That's bad. This is a question that U.S. senators have had to wrestle with for at least 5 years, right? Because there was a lot of pressure on Harry Reid to get rid of the filibuster because the Republicans were stopping every judicial nomination that Barack Obama had. They were also not confirming the executive positions, the cabinet positions. They refused to do it. So Harry Reid got rid of the filibuster. He didn't do it alone. He did it with the Democrats, but they got rid of the filibuster for those things. Mitch McConnell got rid of the filibuster for the Supreme Court. And what remains is the filibuster for legislation. And I don't think that's unreasonable for a senator to say, like, there needs to be time for debate. That is a very important aspect. People need to be heard. I think that's perfectly legitimate, which is why if that was your concern and it was your closely held, thoughtful belief, then you would have a proposal that would be in the forefront of your mind, because it's one of the biggest issues that you face in the context of the process in the Senate, that would go something like this. I favor a plan where you need 60 votes to shut down debate for the first 48 hours. And after 48 hours, automatically, it goes down to 50. You could do that. You could do that. It is incredibly undemocratic, the filibuster. The Senate is already a horribly undemocratic institution. Okay? There is no reason, with all due respect to Matt, why his senators from North Dakota should have the same power as senators from New York State, who have millions more people that they represent.
I'm cool with that.
And the filibuster is even more undemocratic. It has stopped every attempt to move this country forward in terms of progress that we have seen. Undoubtedly, we would get bad legislation under a Republican Senate. But the fact is, the reason why people don't want to get rid of the filibuster is twofold. It's either one, they're institutionalists, which is,
a really reasonable thing to be in this day and age.
Exactly. It's absurd. You
Delusional.
cannot, Harry Reid just, the other day had an interview where he said basically the Senate's gone. The Senate is not what it was. It's not coming back. It's done. It's been blown up. If you're a Senate institutionalist, it's time for you to give up the ghost. And the other reason why you do that is because you don't want the Senate to be responsive to the people. It's because you do not want this desire for Medicare for all, or for increased Social Security payments, or for free college. All these things poll very well. You do not want these things to happen. And you want to be able to rely on the other party to give you the fig leaf so that you can go back to your people and say, couldn't do it.
And particularly in Gillibrand's case. I think this is very appropriate to remind everybody that a couple of weeks ago she was making the final Wall Street rounds before she announced. I think, I think especially in the interim period before this started going, it was very useful to give people props for going in the right direction and embracing things like Medicare for all. But as the rubber hits the road, and that's a great example of the rubber hitting the road, right? You clearly are not committed to this agenda. You clearly do not have the political commitments. And incidentally, even in terms of the fear of Republicans, theoretically, if the Democrats actually did implement an agenda like this, this might mean that the Democrats are in control for a significantly longer period of time.
Well, then they wouldn't
if
have
people
the
had health
Republicans
care,
to hide
if people
behind
delivered
anymore.
on these promises, then there would be
without a doubt
a different electoral landscape.
She's not even making that argument.
No,
though,
she doesn't even have her spin well planned.
No.
But let me just say, I said this the other day, and maybe I should stipulate. I know there's some people that we're not even going to cover probably who have gotten in the race. Like, I guess that Delaney guy or something. But of the mainline candidates, of the people with profile, Gillibrand's the first one that's out. There's no reason for this candidacy.
Well,
I think she's going to be out pretty quick.
She's the one who's supposedly pandering to the left by pivoting on all these issues to be more progressive and I guess we should say that that's good and, give her props for it. But yeah, like Michael said, this is not sincere, and she's really bad at it. If that's what she's trying to do, if she's trying to pander to progressives right now, what is she doing? She's still talking about the Republican Party like they're not a homicidal death cult that needs to be checked every chance we get.
I also think if you're going on Pod Save America and you're explaining to people what cloture is, you're not quite aware of where you are.
You're not, yeah, and that's exactly where you should be aware of where you are, because that's your home.
That to me suggests
that's exactly your home.
That to me suggests maybe not the best campaign infrastructure.
But it's another advantage for Kamala Harris, I think, because one of the things that I've noticed that I actually think is really smart that she did out of the gate is I think it's actually, it goes without saying it's not my politics at all, but I think she grabbed Medicare for all, which I think is going to become, whether they'll follow through in office is a whole other question, but I think that's going to basically become a Democratic, I think that will be a litmus test. But everything else she went on was Clinton, 1992,
Right.
middle class tax cuts. And that is so smart to say basically like it's a combination of bio, healthcare, and an appeal to a center-left constituency that actually still really exists. And Christian Gillibrand has done all of these moves to try to be like a full progressive, which he just is not the case. And it can crumble like that on one question because it's not coherent to her at all. Harris is going to have so much more adaptability.
Yeah, Harris is definitely the one to beat at this point, I think, and the one that the establishment is going to rally behind.
Yeah, I will just caution, it's early, and who knows? I only can tell you that in 2015 we did that. Do you remember that Hayes had that rotisserie candidate thing?
Yes.
And
yes,
I
do.
got it was on air, and it was like a game because people were just laughing like the Republicans are going to lose, and this is way before Trump entered the race. And I had gotten, just by the, picking off a board, not even seeing it was all hidden, like I had Jeb Bush, Mitt Romney, I can't remember, with 2 or 3 others. It was like a complete, I was so convinced I was going to win. There was no money involved, but I felt like, there was in my own mind. And it obviously, none of that worked out. I think I had Scott Walker, too, who was the sleeper at the time.
If
it turned
Scott
out he
Walker,
was literally the sleeper.
If he ever, for some crazy, insane reason, is able to become president, like Sean and I are actually going to move to Mexico because his union will be a thing of the past.
Scott Walker, I think he's done in
I think
politics.
you guys
I
can
hope so.
totally set that scenario aside.
Yeah.
This is a great clip of Reverend William Barber. And
this is incredible.
If I could vote for this guy for president for like 5 times.
That's exactly what we
in a row,
said last night. Why can't he run?
Yeah, I mean, this is, and the beauty is, like, this is a guy who understands A, where his power comes from, and B, how much he has. And he's going to use exactly as much of that power as he can without losing it. I mean, that is what makes such a powerful leader, is where he's not saving any of this. And that's why he's so successful in these moments. There's no reason why he has to be there, right? There's no reason why he's at the Tennessee State University on that stage with the Tennessee governor and a couple of Congress people, I guess. The reason, they didn't have to invite him. Is he even from Tennessee? He's from North Carolina. But he has become such an important figure, and he's going to use that power to basically just shame these people. And this is pretty amazing.
So politicians...
Oh, pause it for 1 second. I should just say that he's there, obviously. He was speaking, this is on Monday, and it was a celebration of Martin Luther King's life.
So politicians can't say they love Dr. King and how he stood for love and unity, but then you deny and refuse to support his agenda. Right, Governor? I mean, since you came, right, Congressman? So let me show you what I mean, Governor. Dr. King would not have been for a wall. And the hurting, how many of y'all are not against a wall? Everybody here that's not against the wall, politician, everybody, and will tell Donald Trump, you don't need to be building a wall to separate people. We need to be spending money to give people health care. Stand on your feet. Now, anybody that doesn't stand on your feet, you get the seat. Wait a minute. How many folks
see the governor standing.
Believe, like Dr. King, that everybody ought to have what Teddy Roosevelt, a Republican, asked for 100 years ago, and that's health care for every citizen? Everybody believes that? Stand up. Now, if you can't stand up for that, then don't say you love Dr. King. You may be seated. I'm just saying, I'm too old to play now. And preachers, don't just think I'm talking to politicians. Just because you can talk about him from the pulpit, but then I'm going to say it like I feel it. They can find you for your pastor's anniversary, but they can't find you in the street with these students and these other folk fighting for injustice. If you are a preacher of the gospel and you are asking your people to tithe, but you are not fighting for them to have a living wage, you are lying.
That guy's amazing.
Where do I convert to whatever that is?
Right. Well, that's another good
Now.
argument against all that whack new atheism nonsense.
Now, MLK was in favor of getting more black CEOs at Fortune 500 companies, and that was it, right?
That was the point. I want to see about a 13% ratio on the Apple board. It's commensurate with our population. Once that's achieved, that's a wrap.
I'm going to make a prediction, and that is that Governor Bill Lee will never go on a stage again with William Barber for the rest of his life.
I appreciated what he was saying, but I thought it was very uncivil.
Yes.
You know, President Trump is poisoning the whole discourse.
So rude.
So rude. So on one hand, you have Steve King being unfortunate in his rhetoric, but then Rashida Tlaib using the profanity. And by the way, I'm no supporter of President Trump, but you can't speak that way.
So important.
So
that
important.
The Democrats be the party of not being stupid.
You gotta not be stupid, and you gotta think not only who will fill your love tank, but who will excite me and Bill Kristol. See you in the 4 o'clock block as well. Thank you, Andrea Mitchell.
Still gross.
Apparently, Joe Rogan had interviewed Barry Weiss.
Oh, yuck, man.
And boy, oh boy. You know, like, again, Joe Rogan's podcast is very, very popular, incidentally.
Hugely popular. And a positive, it seems like she actually convinced him, I think, to have AOC on.
Oh, is that right?
So he's like, I'm working on it. I believe that shit.
That'll be
good.
That'll be very good. But you know, and I'll be honest, I haven't watched the whole thing. I don't know that I could watch the whole thing with Barry Weiss. But here's an instance where a New York Times columnist just simply validates something based upon what Joe Rogan says, and Joe Rogan validates it because somebody sent it to him on the internet. Again, you know, you have hundreds of thousands of people watching you. Really, if you have, I mean, from my perspective, like, you know, 2,000 people, 1,000 people, 500 people, you have a responsibility, just if you're going to impart information, to do some measure of due diligence. And I tell this to all of my elderly relatives who hear something and they get it in an email and they email me like, is this true? And I got this from my in-laws and everybody. And I just say,
let me Google this for you.com.
Exactly. What you do is you just take, if you get an email from somebody and it seems a little bit wacko, like, do you remember when John Kennedy said the following, that like taxes were bad and this and that, and as social justice warriors are going to ruin the country. You take a phrase and you Google it, because more often than not, it's going to lead you to the truth. Here is Joe Rogan not having done that.
Behind this, there's no
I don't mean a
understanding.
mastermind,
Right,
but
I don't think they do understand their implications. When you have a spectrum, right, the far right and the far left, they have a very similar reaction as they drive a person to the other side. The person that sees the far right and sees repulsive racism and bigotry, that build that wall, fuck these Mexicans, fuck those little kids, they should have known better, they're all illegals. That kind of person, that pushes people towards progressivism. It pushes people towards much more liberal, even socialist ideologies. Like, fuck that grossness.
And the same thing can be said. Now, what's fascinating about this, and this is a little bit off the topic of this clip, is just that I don't think that's the case, frankly, on the left. I don't think a socialist or a progressive perspective comes from seeing bigotry, because I think largely I don't think people are reacting to bigotry and they become more left. I mean, I think
he's talking a little. I
think that's true on the right. I think on the right, when people get uncomfortable with sort of like broader inclusion and it threatens their social status, I think they move to the right.
I think you're right about that. I'm not going to debate that. But where I think you're not entirely right is I think that he's speaking in a way. In fact, look, he's literally self-diagnosing himself, right? When he plays a clip, if you stack him as like the average centrist, whatever way you want to define him, if you throw him clips of what's happening with ICE or somebody saying something obscene about detained people, he goes to the right place. And he's like, that's disgusting. We played that clip of him saying, you're not on Team Human.
Right.
I think there's a lot of normal people who actually, whatever you want to call it, progressive, liberal, socialist, whatever, I think they actually do react very strongly against that bigotry.
But that's different.
No, that's what he's saying.
No.
That's what he's saying.
He's saying it pushes you to the left. And I don't think that what he was doing there was being pushed to the left. I think he was just simply saying, oh, wait, Trump and you people, you're not on you're not on Team Human.
By the modern definition, that would put him in the left. I mean, we can get pedantic about this.
No, but I'm saying, like, I don't think you adopt an ideology on the left, a progressive ideology. You may become more attuned to racism and whatnot, but that doesn't necessarily mean you move to the left, right? I mean,
I think in the parlance he's using it, yes, it does mean you move to some sort of left. And I do think that there are people.
All right, well, whatever.
Yeah, whatever. It's getting pedantic. But I think that there's something to what he's saying that's actually relevant for us to learn from, frankly.
Maybe.
People towards progressivism. It pushes people towards much more liberal, even socialist ideologies. Like, fuck that grossness. And the same thing could be said for someone like, I'm going to send you something, Jamie. This is a real poster that Antifa is sending. They were putting on walls and fence posts and shit in the Pacific Northwest. And it's actually kind of hilarious because it's so stupid.
How do I see it?
I'm gonna send it to Jamie, and Jamie's gonna put it up on the screen here. But it says, oops, wrong Jamie. Sorry, Jamie Kilstein. Here you go, buddy. Just sent it. It says, when you date a white, it's not all right. And it's like, it's telling people to not date white people.
Propagation of whites is propagation of hatred, oppression, homophobia, sexism, transphobia, racism, and ableism.
Now, if I was
so are we supposed to sterilize white people?
There it is. We can see it up on the big screen, so it's even grosser.
Cool. That's awesome.
It's large. But see, this is the thing. Racism is terrible, right? So how do you stop racism? Well, racism can only be perpetrated by white people. Oh, well, the problem is white people. We got to stop white people. Well, now you're racist. Like, you're literally being racist to stop.
Is this really everywhere? I've never seen this.
Oh, well, people are finding it and posting it online.
God. Oh my God.
There's that New York Times instinct.
I don't know. It's everywhere. It's probably just one asshole, right?
Do you see
but the person exists, right?
Right, except for the person doesn't exist because it turns out, I mean, it could be one person. It's probably someone who wrote that, when we say left is best, I don't know if people remember where that came from, but it was a graffiti that was written, I think, somewhere in Connecticut. At one point. That
in my hometown.
Right. It was in your hometown?
Yeah.
And it turned out by some right-wingers who wanted to make it look like that was sort of a little bit ham-fisted, the left is best.
I used to play on that playground.
Oh wow, I didn't know.
He
that.
wanted to make it look like these leftists were ruining the playground.
Did Antifa, and that's how he introduced it, right? Put up this poster in Seattle. This is
sorry, we might have gone a little overboard on that one.
This is Snopes, and this is a 2-year-old. Incidentally, it was 2 years ago. This hoax was up there on December 5th, 2016. A photograph purportedly showing a poster warning against the propagation of whites was published to the website Emerger. This is like weeks after the election, right? When, in fact, the left is best thing happened. I think, if I'm not mistaken, it was around that exact same time. And the local Antifa, to the extent that there was, an organized Antifa group in Seattle, I imagine there would have been. They said, okay, it's signed by Emerald City Antifa there. And if you go down, keep going.
Make sure you sign it
They
proper.
posted to, on December 6, 2016, Emerald City Antifa posted a Facebook message saying they had nothing to do with either the creation or the distribution of the poster. It also responded to several comments explaining that the message expressed in the poster was not in line with their views. So clearly somebody was pretending to be them. So this is all I would say. Is like, you look, I didn't watch the whole Barry Weiss thing, but if you're gonna do this, just just feel the responsibility of what you're doing.
Well, especially, it's like, dude, you could totally find, I'm sure, some really stupid examples of the kind of things you're looking for that are real from Twitter or wherever else. And if you really want to, I feel time choices are politics in and of themselves, but is that really what you think is so important to spend time on? Find a real one, for God's sake.
Right. Exactly. I'm sure that somewhere in America, Silent Night is sung without mentioning Jesus, and that's why there's a war on Christmas. But honestly, there's not.
For real, most of the heat should go on Barry Weiss. Though.
I think
she is the New York Times columnist, for Christ's sake.
Right. And I would say this, and I don't know where he was going with this, but to equate the implications of something like that poster with the institutional and systemic racism we have in this country, they're not the same things. The power makes a difference. The power dynamic means everything. And to put it in terms of fighting, right? You could say, well, they're both fighters. One of them weighs 90 pounds and the other weighs 230 pounds. But they're both fighting. They're both fighters.
When the black Israelites, one of the greatest things that happened out of this whole story in D.C. is more people finding out who they are, which I really appreciate in terms of my comedic base. But But if you live in New York or something, they're nothing new to you. And they actually, you know what? Look, they're hateful and they yell bad shit. They trigger white people. And if I walk by them and they call me like a devil and they're particularly upset, I find it has zero implications for my life. It makes no difference. It has no interaction I'm going to have with a bank or a cop or anything. And so you could just generically say, like, you know what? Yeah, I think nobody should be involved in, cults that are hateful. I sure, as a generic proposition, I agree with that. But there's zero stakes. It doesn't mean a fucking thing.
Well, for me, the stakes are I get exposed to new ideas.
Even if they found a poster that was real, like, they do this all the time, and this is their bad faith sophistry. Because you're supposed to argue against your opponent's strongest points.
Steelman arguments only.
They regularly, in addition to just pure fucking straw man arguments, this is why they're so obsessed with college campuses. Because they want to argue against children on their way to class whose politics are not fully formed yet.
Well,
what the fuck isn't Steelman about white people shouldn't have kids?
I don't think there is something necessarily wrong with the pulling out of one example. If your argument is this is where it germinates and that's how it extends. Like, back in the day on Air America, I would do a story about some, a lunatic in Indiana who is introducing legislation to say, like, fetuses should have the same rights as human being, as
that's
as
someone
people.
with power.
Well, wait a second, but you're a backbencher in the state legislature. You don't have the power, and that they put it up for a vote, and it loses, 50-1. But the fact of the matter, that guy, it turns out to be like, the vice president 10 years later. There is a track record of those ideas progressing, and within the context of the Republican Party. If someone could show where, this idea, like how this is going to jump outside of the narrow colleges, A, the narrow colleges that it exists in, B, that it's actually even taking place in colleges more broadly speaking, right? I mean, I can't remember who was made the point of, you can talk about Ben Shapiro's not allowed to speak at, some college up in, upstate New York. But then he goes on to the next 1,000 colleges he's going to give.
Oh, that was for Charles Murray. Eddie Glaude made that point.
Yeah, exactly.
Like Charles Murray got protested in a way in Middlebury that maybe was excessive. And then he went the next day to another
to Columbia,
elite
and then
liberal arts college
went
and promoted racism and social Darwinism uninterrupted.
Right. And if you complain that there are certain audiences that don't think your stuff is, funny anymore, let's say, like, well, then, okay, go to a different room. You played a Chinese restaurant on Route 1 outside of Boston. There's no one you can go and complain to that. They didn't like the fact that I made literary references.
Madam Lau, you told me that there wouldn't be any lavender at the Yuk factory.
It is very suspicious, though, when all of the extreme examples of the left that they can find are either made up or like come from college kids.
Well, yeah, because there's none of those. You can find a men's rights activist who is denying the existence of date rape online, and then all of a sudden, 2 years later, he's pictured in the White House and getting retweeted by Donald Trump Jr. I mean, that's real. The AOC is up there, and all she's talking about is a marginal tax rate 20% less than a Republican president had in 1950. Yeah. She's not up there talking about, walking around with, people who are talking about appropriating, people's BMWs or something.
Yeah. And people like Barry Weiss need there to be extremists out there so that they can stay in, quote unquote, the middle, even though I think her politics are actually very reactionary in many ways. She wants to come off like the reasonable person, and she wants to have her opinions legitimized in mainstream outlets, because that's the other thing about them, and also why they're so obsessed with college is because they're all a bunch of little fucking hand raisers.
The IDW is completely reactionary. It is completely reactionary. It is selling a power structure, a vision of what the world should be, which is virtually identical to the way that it's been for years. It has been oppressive of various numbers of people for centuries in some instances. And they are packaging it as if it is new, unheard of, taboo ideas. And it's not. It's the same. It's literally your grandfather's IDW. It's literally your grandfather's IDW.
Well, then they can
There's
play the game.
There's a reason why your grandpas wore hoods at the time, because they also were in the IDW.
But then they play the game of like, oh, I'm liberal on social issues in the U.S. while supporting, like white ethno states abroad.
Well, yeah, and I think it's also just sort of like this, I'm liberal. You're not liberal. You're just completely in the mainstream.
You want to smoke weed and not pay taxes.
Right.
That doesn't make you terribly liberal.
But, I'm sorry. The idea of saying like people don't say I am not against black people marrying white people, therefore I'm liberal. People are not going to be, saying I'm gay as a credential for being liberal in another 10 or 15 years. It's just not going to stick. It's going to mean like, oh, you mean you're not a total a-hole for being against gay marriage? You're not some type of retrograde moron?
Dave Rubin might still be trying it.
People don't say like, I'm liberal because I believe the world is round.
Yeah, I believe in the heliocentric theories.
I'm a classical liberal.
All right, I think we're gonna have to. Yeah, we're running too late. I'm sorry. I got time for one more phone call. I got a bunch of people who have been on the line for over 80 minutes. Just gonna take the next one. 804. You calling from an 804 area code? Who's this? Where you calling from?
Hey, Sam. This is Will. How are you? I'm actually from Virginia.
Will from Virginia.
And,
what's on your mind?
I wanted to talk to you about some of the stuff that's been happening at the General Assembly in Virginia. It's been really interesting.
All right, give me the quick version.
Quick version, okay. So I guess the most relevant thing is going to be on coming up Monday. There's going to be a huge teachers walkout. That's pretty much going to be every teacher from every school in the state. Well, like, I don't know, if all of them are going to be there, but it's going to be a statewide march as far as I know. And I know Randy Weingarten is going to be there, and I think our NEA, the head of our NEA in Virginia is going to be there. So
okay,
it's going to be pretty cool.
And when's this happening?
It's going to happen on Monday, the 28th.
Wow, that's pretty big. That could be timed.
Yeah.
Denver teachers could end up striking around that time as well. They've just voted to authorize.
Yeah, and actually, we're not. The teachers aren't allowed to strike in Virginia because it's one of those. It's for a right to work state, and it sucks. But it can show you the power of it happened in West Virginia last year. So
interesting.
And this one seems like more organized because there's actually I found that I get the emails from the NEA that said basically what Randy Weingarten is going to be there, and I know some of the DSA people are going to also from the local DSA are going to be there as well.
Well, that's cool. We'll keep our eye out for that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for that update.
I'm playing.
Appreciate it.
So I'll know how it turns out.
Yeah, call back in and let us know. Appreciate the call.
I'm a classical Muslim.
All right, that is all our time for today for calls, folks. See you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bar, but finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I get somewhere the choice was made, for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive between the 101 and the 5. Do you know how far the detour takes